Evelyn Laverne murder case. A lot of lies and an accidental confession. The Hernando County Sheriff's Office, 72-year-old Merl Mackey made a surprising confession to a murder that occurred over 40 years ago. The detectives were questioning him about the disappearance of his wife, Evelyn Laverne Mackey, in 1981, when he accidentally revealed his involvement in the crime. This revelation has reopened the investigation into his wife's disappearance, and the authorities are working to uncover the truth behind this cold case. But what could have driven Merl Mackey to confess to murder after all these years? And what really happened to Evelyn Laverne Mackey in 1981? Stick around to find out. Let me take you back to Hernando County, Florida, in 1978, where a strong and independent woman named Evelyn Laverne was raising two of her children alone after getting divorced. She was trying her best to make ends meet and keep her family happy. One day, Evelyn was at her local church attending a nonviolent offender outreach program when she met a man named Merl Mackey. Despite his troubled past and multiple stints in prison, they quickly hit it off and started spending more time together. Eventually, Merl moved in with Evelyn after they got married, and they seemed to be happy and content with each other's company. On the morning of November 5th, 1981, Evelyn Laverne was seen by her teenager daughter, who made breakfast for her before leaving for school. Later that day, Evelyn's new husband, Merl Mackey, picked up her daughter alone and told her that Evelyn had gone to Ohio to take care of her sick sister-in-law. However, Evelyn never arrived in Ohio, and her sister-in-law was not expecting her as well. As days went by, Evelyn's daughter became increasingly worried and asked Merl about her mother's whereabouts. Merl consistently changed his story, telling the police that Evelyn had gone to Tamsa or had left with a boyfriend, but none of these accounts added up. The detectives quickly realized that Merl was a compulsive liar and that Evelyn had disappeared without a trace. Despite the extensive investigation, there was no record of Evelyn being anywhere, and her family reported her missing. The question remained, what really happened to Evelyn Laverne? Stick around to find out. In January 1982, detectives discovered that money had been withdrawn from Evelyn's bank account on the day that she disappeared, and the account was emptied months later. The case went cold, but it reopened 33 years later when a surgeon attended the National Homicide Conference. Merl Mackey was tracked down in Chandler, Texas, and detectives lured him back to the station under the guise of authenticating his previous interview transcripts. During the interrogation, the detective maintained a friendly and non-threatening atmosphere, carefully avoiding making Merl feel backed into a corner. Stay tuned to find out what happened next. During the interrogation, the detective confronted Merl about the discrepancies in his story regarding his wife's disappearance. Merl denied having any knowledge of his wife's whereabouts or her withdrawal of money from the bank. The detective mentioned that Merl had previously stated that Evelyn had a suitcase packed and was going to visit her sister-in-law. When pressed for details, Merl became confused and vague. The detective then revealed that he had misled Merl by claiming to have found Evelyn's remains, which prompted Merl to finally admit to having information about her disappearance. As the detective probed into a difficult subject, Merl's demeanor shifted from relaxed and self-assured to slightly anxious and cautious. The detective informed him that the case had been reopened as a cold case and that there were enough inconsistencies in his story to warrant charges of premeditated first-degree murder. The detective accused Merl of being a manipulator who had gone after everyone in Laverne's life to support his story. Merl was taken aback and vehemently denied any wrongdoing. The statute of limitations for second-degree murder had expired in 1981, so the detectives needed a confession from Merl in order to charge him with premeditated first-degree murder. The detective pointed out the contradictions in Merl's story, including his claims that Laverne had left for her brothers or ran off with another man. The detective accused Merl of being a con man who had manipulated multiple women in the church. The detectives had spoken to many people involved in Laverne's life and investigated Merl's claims. Feeling trapped, Merl decided to change tactics and asked how they determined Laverne's death. He questions the detective about the status of the case and if they're simply waiting for a confession. The detective responds by explaining that his goal is to appeal to Merl's conscience and return closure to Laverne's family by recovering her body. The detective emphasizes that a confession is not necessary for this. The detective told a lie to Merl, making him believe that he was already caught when in reality, the detectives needed a confession from Merl to charge him. Merl can still leave without any charges. The detective asked for Merl's cooperation to locate a missing person's body, as without it, the case would appear as first-degree murder. The detective urged Merl to reveal the body's location, offering him the best possible outcome for his cooperation. The detective's last attempt to keep Merl from leaving was to downplay the incident, suggesting that it may have been an accident rather than a deliberate act. The detective assured Merl that if it was an accident and he was just afraid to speak up, they would not be able to charge him with first-degree murder. The detective urged Merl to come forward with the truth, assuring him that they could sense that he wanted to talk and they believed that he knew the whereabouts of his wife. After 33 years, Merl Mackey finally admitted that his wife had died due to an accident while they were fishing at Anglers. He shared that he'd been carrying the guilt of not being able to save her and had watched her sink after tying a rope around her. However, the detectives were still skeptical of his version of the story and asked why did he not call for help. The detectives further probed and asked if he had lifted her back onto the dock, to which Merl replied no, as she was bleeding profusely. During the conversation, Merl Mackey inadvertently confessed to committing first-degree murder when he revealed that he had tied up his wife, Evelyn, with a rope and anchor before pushing her underwater. Despite the detectives urging him to reveal the location of her body, Merl agreed to drive with them to the dock in Florida where the incident occurred but refused to drive them himself. Although Merl confessed to the murder of his wife, the case fell outside the jurisdiction of the detectives who brought their findings to Brian Kramer, assistant attorney for Florida's 8th Judicial Circuit. The evidence was presented to a grand jury who ultimately indicted Merl for first-degree murder. In an effort to locate Laverne's remains, detectives searched the dock where Merl claimed to have left her body, but unfortunately, they were unable to find any conclusive evidence. In the end, Merl decided to plead guilty to the lesser charge of second-degree murder. He received a 10-year prison sentence, bringing a sense of closure to his tragic and painful chapter in Laverne's family lives. While justice was served, he can never truly make up for the loss of a loved one. The detectives and legal team worked tirelessly to ensure that Laverne's memory would not be forgotten and that Merl was held accountable for his actions. In conclusion, the case of Laverne Mackey's disappearance remained a mystery of over 3 decades until Merl Mackey finally confessed to her murder during an interview with detectives. Despite initially downplaying the incident as an accident, Merl eventually revealed that he had tied an anchor to Laverne's body and threw her into the water at the dock. However, her body was never found, and Merl was indicted for first-degree murder by a grand jury, but ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a 10-year prison sentence. The tragic events surrounding Laverne's death serve as a reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from domestic violence and the importance of holding abusers accountable for their actions.